Have you ever been in a situation where a man suddenly went silent on you without a word, without a reason, without even a goodbye? If so, leave a simple dot in the comments. I want you to know you are not alone. And if what you're about to hear resonates with you, don't forget to like this video. It might be exactly what another woman out there needs to hear today. When a man pulls away or chooses silence, the first thought that rushes through your mind is often, what did I do wrong? You start replaying every conversation, analyzing every word, trying to find that one thing that might have pushed him away. That's the default reaction for so many of us: self-blame. It's as if his silence becomes a mirror, but instead of reflecting the truth, it distorts your own sense of self-worth. But what if I told you that his silence isn't really about you at all? What if his indifference is not a sign of your shortcomings, but rather a reflection of his own internal struggles? Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." And more than that, he emphasized that the parts of others we react to are often projections of the parts of ourselves we haven't yet accepted or understood. Let's go deeper. A man who chooses to ignore you may not even fully understand why he's doing it. To the outside world, he might seem composed, strong, in control. But beneath that surface, there could be a storm he's unwilling to face. His silence might be masking fear, not power. Fear of intimacy, fear of vulnerability, fear that if he lets you get too close, you might see the parts of him he hasn't accepted in himself. There's a concept in Jungian psychology called the shadow. It represents the unconscious aspects of the personality that we try to hide, deny, or suppress, often because we consider them unacceptable, weak, or shameful. The more someone avoids facing their shadow, the more it controls them from behind the scenes. And many times, silence is not just a way of hiding from others, it's a way of hiding from oneself. So when a man disappears emotionally, or even physically, that act of withdrawal might be a defense mechanism, not necessarily against you, but against his own inner chaos. Perhaps he's intimidated by the way you make him feel vulnerable, exposed, seen. Perhaps your presence brings out emotions in him he doesn't yet know how to handle, and instead of confronting them, he retreats. He chooses distance over discomfort. Here's the mistake many women make: interpreting his silence as a problem that needs fixing. We turn inward, thinking that if we just do more, say less, try harder, love better, maybe then he'll open up, maybe then he'll come back. But the truth is, his silence often says more about his emotional limitations than it does about your worth. And this is where real power begins, not in chasing answers from someone who refuses to communicate, but in reclaiming your perspective. What if instead of asking, "Why did he ignore me?" you asked, "What is this situation showing me about myself? What parts of you are being triggered? Where do you need healing? Not just from him, but from the patterns you may have accepted before him." The silence you're experiencing might not be the end. It might be the beginning of a deeper understanding of yourself, of a refusal to settle for emotional breadcrumbs, of a new boundary that says, "I deserve someone who communicates, who chooses to stay, who is not afraid of feeling deeply." Carl Jung also said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." His silence might be unconscious, but your awareness of it doesn't have to be. So before you dive into self-doubt, before you internalize his absence as your fault, pause. His silence is not your shame, it's his shadow. And you are not here to carry what he refuses to face. Carl Jung introduced a powerful concept in psychology known as the shadow, a part of the human psyche that holds all the traits we reject, suppress, or feel ashamed of. It is the emotional basement where fear, insecurity, guilt, and inadequacy reside. And although we try to bury these parts deep within ourselves, they never really go away. They wait in silence, influencing our behaviors in subtle, often self-sabotaging ways. For many men, especially those raised to suppress vulnerability and mask emotion with stoicism, this shadow becomes their default driver in relationships. Now imagine a man meeting a woman who sees him, not just the version he shows to the world, but the version he hides from it. She sees his hesitation masked as confidence. She sees his ambition, but also senses the exhaustion behind it. She sees his potential, but also the fear that he may not live up to it. And that frightens him, not because she's wrong, but because she might be too right, too perceptive, too emotionally attuned to let his mask remain untouched. This is the beginning of the emotional retreat. The silence. A man might choose silence, not out of cruelty, but out of confusion, out of fear, out of a desperate attempt to protect himself from being exposed not by you, but by his own inner truths. He withdraws because something about your presence brings him closer to a version of himself he is not ready to meet. He retreats not because you said the wrong thing, but because being with you forces him to confront what he has spent years avoiding. There is a woman, let's call her Lena. She loved deeply, fully, generously. She met a man who seemed drawn to her warmth, to her depth, to her fierce sense of empathy. For a time, he mirrored that connection. He responded. He opened up, just enough. But then slowly, without reason, he began to pull back. Messages became shorter, calls less frequent. The space between them widened like a quiet fog settling in. Lena did what most women do in this situation. She questioned herself. Did I come on too strong? Was I too available? Should I have played harder to get? She replayed moments in her head, trying to spot the misstep. But the truth wasn't in what she did. It was in what he couldn't do. He couldn't hold space for the intensity of a genuine connection. Her emotional presence, instead of being a gift, became a mirror, and he wasn't ready to see his own reflection in it. A man's silence, in moments like these, can function as a shield. It is a defense mechanism designed to prevent further intimacy, because further intimacy might bring emotional exposure. It's like a child lost in the darkness of the forest. Instead of lighting a torch to find his way, he chooses to close his eyes. He believes that if he cannot see the fear, then maybe the fear cannot see him. But silence doesn't erase vulnerability, it magnifies it. Ask yourself this: is he silent because you're not good enough, or because you make him feel things he doesn't know how to process? Does your strength threaten his sense of control? Does your clarity make him question his own confusion? The answer might not lie in his words, but in their absence. For men who have not yet done the inner work, who have not faced their own emotional wounds, the presence of a woman who is emotionally mature, self-aware, and expressive can be overwhelming. She doesn't play games. She doesn't need to be chased. She brings clarity, and with it, the unspoken challenge of emotional accountability. This is what the shadow fears most: being seen, being confronted, being named. Silence is then not about you. It's not about your beauty, your value, your worth. It is about his inner threshold, what he can handle emotionally, what he's ready to acknowledge in himself. And if he hasn't yet integrated his own shadow, if he hasn't learned to sit with his own fear of intimacy, no amount of patience from you will draw him closer. You could whisper kindness into his silence, and still, he might not respond. Not because your voice is not enough, but because he's still trying to silence his own. This is not about blaming him. It's about understanding the psychology at play. Men, like women, are shaped by experiences, expectations, and unspoken rules. Many are told to be strong, but not sensitive, to lead, but not feel, to desire, but not depend. And so, when real emotion shows up in the form of a deep, honest connection, it creates a dissonance. Their inner world, unprepared for such intimacy, shuts down. They ghost, not always out of malice, but out of emotional paralysis. You are not the cause of that, but your presence may be the trigger. So when you sit there, wondering why he pulled away, why the calls stopped, why the silence grew louder, remember this. His silence is not a verdict on your worth. It is a reflection of his fear, of his shadow, of his journey that may still be in progress. And the most powerful thing you can do in that moment is not chase, not prove, not over-explain. It is to stand firm in your own emotional truth. Because the woman who stays grounded in her value cannot be shaken by a man still running from his own. There's a shift that happens when you stop responding. When the texts no longer come from you. When the subtle likes, the story views, the little check-ins that used to be routine suddenly vanish. At first, he might not even notice. He might assume it's just a momentary pause, a hiccup in the pattern. But then something strange begins to happen. He starts to look for you. Quietly, secretly, silently. This is the psychology of reversed silence. The moment you withdraw your energy, not in bitterness, not in a show of defiance, but in calm clarities, the moment his mind begins to spiral. You see, attention is addictive, and consistency breeds expectation. When someone grows accustomed to being the center of your emotional orbit, your absence becomes louder than any words you could have spoken. Suddenly, he's watching your stories again. He's liking a photo from 3 weeks ago. He's leaving a vague comment with a wink or a fire emoji, just enough to signal presence, but not enough to open a real conversation. It's a dance of control, a subtle attempt to test the waters. Are you still watching? Are you still affected? Are you still available? But you've changed the rules. Carl Jung once said, when one extreme disappears, the other becomes stronger. The psyche, he believed, is always seeking balance. When someone who provided emotional certainty vanishes, the mind overcorrects, it becomes hyper-aware of the void. What used to be taken for granted now begins to feel like loss. Let's be clear, he may not be consciously aware of what he's feeling. Most men who play the avoidance game don't immediately recognize their own discomfort as a response to absence. They may rationalize it. They may tell themselves you were never that important, that they're just curious, just checking. But underneath that rationalization is a growing imbalance, a mental itch that wasn't there before. And that's where your real power lies. When you stop responding, you're not punishing him. You're not playing childish games. You're simply withdrawing the emotional investment that was never reciprocated. You're reclaiming your energy. You're choosing clarity over chaos. And whether he admits it or not, this causes internal disruption. The emotional security he once felt with you knowing you'd respond, knowing you'd be there, knowing you'd carry's gone. And what replaces it is a quiet panic. It starts small. He might scroll through your feed late at night. He might replay your story 2-3 times, thinking you won't notice. He might start posting things designed to catch your attention: song lyrics, gym selfies, vague quotes about growth or missing someone. It's not because he's changed. It's because your absence has changed his perception of you. You are no longer predictable. And human beings, by nature, fear what they can't predict. We are wired to seek patterns, to feel safe in consistency. When a woman who once gave freely suddenly becomes emotionally unavailable with hostility, but with peace, it disarms the male psyche. It removes the illusion of control. It forces him to sit with a question he's never had to ask. Did I lose her? Was I wrong? But this is not the moment to go back. This is not the time to reward breadcrumbs with a full-course meal of emotional labor. This is the moment to observe, to let the silence speak for itself. Because here's the truth. When you were showing up, when you were consistent, when you were invested, he equated your availability with permanence. He assumed your presence was a given, not a gift. Your emotional energy became background noise to his daily life, something he could turn the volume down on whenever it suited him. But now that the music has stopped, the silence is deafening. The human brain doesn't just register absence, it fills it with questions. What is she doing now? Who is she talking to? Why is she not reaching out? And more importantly, Has she moved on? The power dynamic has shifted. He is no longer the one who chooses when to engage. He is now the one waiting for a signal, a sign, a response. But none comes, because the woman he once knew, the one who waited, who hoped, who quietly accepted less is gone. Now you are the mystery. You are the question he can't answer. And that, more than anything, is what disturbs him. Because unlike attention, uncertainty has the power to unravel even the most confident personas. But this is not about revenge. It's about recognition of your value, of your limits, of your self-worth. The silence you now offer is not a weapon. It's a mirror. And if he chooses to look into it, he may see what he once overlooked. A woman who gave more than she received, who cared deeply, but who finally learned to care for herself more. So when you see those small signals, those half-hearted attempts to re-enter your world, remember what they are. They are not declarations of love. They are symptoms of uncertainty. They are echoes of a man who thought you would always be there, now wondering if he was wrong. And here is where you must be strongest. Because this moment, this silence, is where many women make the fatal mistake. They interpret the small signs as a green light to resume the chase. They step back into the pattern, hoping that this time, he's ready. But he's not. He's simply uncomfortable. And you are finally powerful. Your absence is not a void. It is a statement, a boundary, a shift in energy that says, I no longer pour myself into places where I am not nourished. I no longer chase people who flee from their own emotions. I am no longer here to teach you how to value me. So ask yourself this: if silence has the power to disturb him, what does that say about the comfort he once had? And if a man only begins to reflect when you're gone, was he ever truly present when you were near? The answers don't lie in his stories, his likes, or his cryptic messages. They lie in how you choose to respond or not respond at all. Because real transformation doesn't happen when someone regrets losing you. It happens when you realize you never needed them to begin with. But remember, this is only the beginning, because this was just the first weak point, and there are more, much more. Stay with me. The next one might just reveal the turning point you never saw coming. There comes a moment, quiet, powerful, unassuming, when everything shifts. It doesn't happen in a grand declaration. It doesn't begin with revenge or bitterness. It begins the day you decide to live for yourself. Not to prove anything, not to make him regret, but simply because you remember that your life was never meant to revolve around someone else's silence. Let me tell you a story. There was a girl who gave everything to one man. Her time, her energy, her attention, her emotional presence. She dimmed parts of herself to fit what he needed. She pulled away from friends who noticed the imbalance. She stopped pursuing dreams that didn't align with his vision. Slowly, her world became smaller, centered around him. And for a while, she thought that was love, devotion, sacrifice, commitment. But one day, he stopped showing up. Slowly at first, then suddenly, and when the silence came, it was deafening. She waited. She blamed herself. She thought that if she could just be more patient, he would come back. But time passed, and something unexpected happened. In the silence, she heard something new, her own voice. She started calling old friends. She spent time with people who made her laugh without conditions. She picked up a book she had abandoned months ago. She revisited dreams she had shelved. And in doing so, she began to expand again. Her world, once centered around him, grew in new directions. It blossomed. This is the beginning of your power, when he is no longer the center of your gravity. You see, men who take you for granted often do so because of one psychological illusion, the feeling of exclusivity. They believe they are the only source of your joy, your attention, your emotional investment. And when you reflect all of your light onto them, they bask in it, assuming it will always shine in their direction. But when you take that light back, not to punish, but to grow, it disrupts everything. This is not about making him jealous or playing games. It's about rediscovering the truth, that your life is multifaceted, rich, expansive, that you are more than someone's option, that your presence in his life is a privilege, not a given. The moment you reconnect with your own life, your passions, your friendships, your purpose, you begin to dissolve the illusion he's held onto, that you need him to feel whole. Psychologically, this shakes a man to his core, because now he no longer feels irreplaceable. And that realization, subtle as it may seem, creates a fracture in his ego. He was the one who expected you to orbit around him. Now you are your own universe. There is immense beauty in this evolution. It's not about becoming cold or distant. It's about becoming full. When you laugh with people who love you without pretense, when you wake up excited about a life that has nothing to do with him, something changes not only in you, but in how he sees you. You are no longer the woman waiting for his message. You are the woman who didn't stop shining when he left. That is magnetic. That is powerful. That is terrifying for someone who believed they were your only source of light. Let's be clear. This kind of transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's not performative. It's not about proving him wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you were always enough, even when you forgot. Start small. Rekindle a friendship that makes you feel seen. Take yourself out somewhere that makes you feel alive. Say yes to something that has nothing to do with him. Pick up the pieces of yourself you abandoned when you were trying to hold him together. And as you do, you'll notice something. Your energy shifts, and when your energy shifts, everything else follows. He might come back around. He might test the waters, drop a message, remind you of a memory. But this time, the difference is within you. You are no longer anchored to his approval. You are no longer waiting to be chosen. You have already chosen yourself. There's a saying, when you stop making him the reason you smile, he'll start noticing that your smile is harder to find. And it's true. Men don't usually feel the absence until the certainty they relied on is gone. And when that happens, they are forced to reassess what they once dismissed. But now, you hold the power to decide. Not based on fear, not from lack, but from knowing that your world didn't end when he left it expanded. This isn't about making him suffer. This is about ending your own suffering. It's about stepping out of the emotional dependency that made you believe his attention defined your worth. It never did. His validation was just a mirror, but the reflection has always been yours to define. And now, he sees something new when he looks at you. A woman who no longer needs his presence to feel valuable. A woman whose time is filled with purpose. A woman who didn't just survive the silence, but thrived in it. So when you see him watching from the sidelines, wondering what changed, don't rush to explain. Don't shrink yourself to make him comfortable again. Let him sit in the discomfort of realizing that you became better without him. Because this growth, it's not just for today. It's for every version of you that once settled, that once waited, that once hoped for someone to return. Now, you are returning to yourself. And that, more than anything, is what dismantles his illusion. But you haven't yet seen the deepest weakness. The one that cuts past ego and into identity. The part of him that begins to question not just your absence, but his own sense of significance. Because when a man realizes he's no longer central in your world, he begins to fear something he never anticipated. Being forgotten. And that, my friend, is where everything starts to unravel. But stay with me, because what comes next is the most crucial shift of all. The point where silence turns into awakening, and where your transformation becomes irreversible. There is a subtle but powerful moment when everything turns. It is not when you yell, cry, or demand answers. It is not when you post vague quotes or show the world how unaffected you are. It is when you genuinely no longer need him, when you stop performing strength and actually become it. That is the moment when the dynamic reverses. At first, he may not notice. He may think your silence is temporary, your distance a reaction, your detachment a tactic. But then it lingers. You don't reach out, you don't respond. You don't try to fix or explain or soften the edge. And slowly, he begins to feel something unfamiliar. Not guilt, not regret, but insignificance. Carl Jung once said, "The persona is what we would like to be and how we wish to appear to others, while the shadow is what we are and do not wish to be." And most people construct their sense of identity through the reflections they receive from others. A man, especially one who has grown used to being admired, desired, prioritized, will often tie his self-worth to how others respond to him, especially the women who once held him in high regard. You were once his mirror. Through your attention, he saw himself as valuable. Through your presence, he felt powerful. You gave him a sense of being central, essential, irreplaceable. And for a while, he believed that reflection was real. But mirrors do not speak. They only reflect what stands before them. Now, the mirror is gone. You no longer offer praise he hasn't earned. You no longer seek his validation. You are no longer his emotional home. And in the absence of your reflection, he begins to feel not just alone but undefined. This is the wound he never anticipated. He thought pulling away gave him the power. He believed being unavailable made him desirable. He assumed your attachment was permanent. But the moment you stop showing up, the illusion collapses. And now, the roles are reversed. You are not the woman who waits anymore. You are not the one wondering why he changed, why he disappeared, why he couldn't meet you where you were. You no longer look at him as a man you lost. You see him now for who he is. Someone who was never ready for what you had to offer. This is not cruelty. This is clarity. His ego begins to unravel. Not because you're angry, but because you're indifferent. Not because you shout, but because you no longer whisper. Not because you blocked him, but because you simply moved on. He feels the shift in his identity. Once the center of your thoughts, now just a shadow in your memory. Once the reason behind your hesitation, now just a footnote in your growth. He was a chapter. You are the whole book. There is a unique kind of discomfort in realizing that someone who used to revolve around you no longer acknowledges your gravity. It shakes a man to confront his own relevance or lack thereof. The question he never thought to ask now lingers louder than ever. If she no longer needs me, then who am I? That's the real impact. Not the silence itself, but what the silence says. It says you've reclaimed your voice. It says you've closed a door not out of pain, but out of peace. It says he is no longer the standard you measure yourself by. And this, more than any other wound, forces a man to reflect. Not because he wants to repair the relationship, but because he needs to repair his sense of self. You were never meant to complete him but for a time. Your admiration made him feel whole. Without it, he is left with only himself. The contrast is sharp. He used to feel like everything. Now, he's just something. A memory. A man who once could silence your world with his absence, now silenced by yours. And still, he may reach out. Not with apology, but curiosity. Not with change, but confusion. Because he wants to know when the shift happened. He wants to trace it back to a specific moment, a specific word. But he will never find it. Because it wasn't one thing, it was everything. It was the nights you waited, the messages you never received, the clarity you gained alone, the freedom you felt in your own skin. It was the strength you built not because he stayed, but because he didn't. So let him wonder. Let him sit in the silence that once belonged to you. Let him feel what it means to no longer be needed. Because this is the most honest truth. When you stop needing him, he begins to feel your absence as a loss. Not because you were dependent, but because you were a light he assumed would never dim. He can choose silence if he wants. But only you decide who is worthy of hearing your voice, feeling your presence, standing beside your heart. Because it was never about being chosen. It was always about remembering that you had the power to choose. And now, with nothing left to prove, you finally choose yourself.